Okay, well, we're live, Craig,
Okay.
apparently. So that's cool. And welcome to this experiment of conversation and video technology. We're using Vimeo Live, which is a technology offered obviously by Vimeo.com, which we pay for. And it also enables us to go to multiple locations or places at once. And we're definitely on the College of Exploration website, and we're also on I think Facebook, and perhaps a couple of others. So this is a bit of an experiment for this first go around, and I'm with Craig Lindell, who is a friend and colleague. And welcome, Craig.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to talk about a number of topics, but particularly in the context of encouraging design dialogues. And we're going to have a conversation, and we have these conversations, and we thought we'd share it in this way. And Craig's been thinking about this. I have. I've been aware of structured deliberations or design dialogue for 30 plus years when I first met John Warfield and Aleko Christakis. And that's what brought one of the things that brought Craig and I together was this interest in discipline dialogue or design dialogue or structured deliberations. So that's my introduction, Craig. Do you want to give some thought too on why we're here?
Sure. I'm Craig Lindell. I've been intrigued by design dialogue for 15 years, not so much as a practitioner, but as the guy who pitches it to try and get people to pay attention to it. And as a prelude to that, I actually co-founded and chaired a citizens forum in a distressed economic environment back in the 90s. New Bedford, Massachusetts had lost 10,000 of its 50,000 jobs in 8 years, and it was an economy in crisis, and nobody knew what to do. And we ended up with a forum of about 150 people, bankers and business people and nonprofit people and so forth. There's a structure behind it. And it was called the No Name Forum. We realized we had to have the intellectual and moral high ground and not threaten the politicians. So all we did was talk. And out of it emerged a cornucopia of possibilities that no one, when we began, could have imagined. What happened was we gave people time to meet and before and after, and that spawned a number of voluntary associations, and people who were part of the forum got the nominating chairs of boards in town, and pretty soon the community foundation and a couple of boards had forum members, and the community and the forum was spawning a number of voluntary associations, which led me to the assumption that the richness of democracy was in the diversity of its people, the plurality of their perspectives, the literacy of their lived experiences, and the capacity of their creative imaginations. And when you put that together, it has rich rewards.
Yeah, that's a great sort of beginning in a local environment. And you had, and we have sort of watched the evolution of the work of structured dialogue that offers an opportunity for a group to come together and learn and listen differently. And we are hoping that we can encourage more people to follow up on that. Particularly in light of the multiple challenges that we're facing around the world, and particularly in the areas that I've been interested in, and it's another area we overlap, Craig, is that of the importance of water in obviously our lives and to the planet. And I've spent the last 25 years plus promoting ocean literacy, and I've come to the conclusion that unless we have water literacy and everybody has a good understanding of that, then it's we've got a long way to go. So I know that's another area of interest of yours, and we're trying to bring these ideas together in some meaningful way.
Well, if I could add just a quick point on that, the World Economic Forum that meets in Davos every year in 2024 I think it maybe earlier created a commission for on the economics of water, and its premise is that we are going to have to provide water to all the people on the planet wherever they live, because water isn't equally distributed as air is, and that's going to cost us $330 billion a year. That water, in their judgment, has to be a common pool resource, which means it we have to treat it with indigenous values. And in the United States, and I'm sure other parts of the world, water is a commodity that's bought and sold. So that's a dilemma. The reason we have to deliver it to people who don't have it is because if we don't, then the social upheaval that will come from it in terms of migration pressures and combat war will cost the gross domestic product of the planet approximately 20% of its value. So that is a condition we're on, and will play into this larger issue that we're talking about of the I'll raise it at this point, that in essence, I think much of what we're doing in the West and globally is mourning the losses of our worldviews, because they're not fulfilling whatever we're thinking is not fulfilling our hopes.
Yeah, this is where we got to in thinking about these conversations, is that there is a trauma associated with the shift in world experience. Well, everything from family to community to world experience that is being experienced by many, if not most, people around the world, due to a wide-ranging number of factors that interplay with each other, and the complexity of this interplay is confounding, and it's coupled with the frustrations and experiences now of governance structures and democratic processes that were designed for a previous age. And that is accentuating these challenges. So we're going to, in these conversations, attempt to start with the individual, well, not start necessarily, but to look into what mourning the loss of worldviews means and how that is impacting life today, and what there might be some remedies or some approaches that we might offer in the course of these conversations. Maybe you
Um,
can pick,
I'm sorry.
maybe you can pick up on that.
Yeah, I think uh, the quick expression of that is where it started to dawn on me, was that Peter Drucker wrote a book called the Age of Discontinuity in 1969, and predicted that the institutional structures that we had would not be sufficient to encounter the complexities that were coming at us. And actually, we weren't thinking about the world in complex terms at that point. A few people were. A thing called the Berkeley Bubble, if anybody wants to do some research, and a fellow named Wes Churchman had written a book, The Design of Inquiring Systems. But Drucker, to my mind, was followed up, interestingly, by another California social theorist named Richard Norgaard, who wrote a book called Development Betrayed in the 1990s, I think 1994, and he began it by saying we thought that science would give us control over nature, technology would improve our quality of life, and reason would give us good government, and not one of the three has happened. So that's an easy way to get your maybe have it resonate with a lot of people. Peter Turchin then in 2016 wrote a book called Ages of Discord. He's a historical demographer, and his premise was that you can trace these patterns back that we're in back 3,000 years. It's not related to what we're going to talk about, but his argument is interesting because his premise is that when you um, establish dramatic differences in wealth, which we were doing. The average American male had not had an increase in his wages since 1972, the recession. Between 1984, I think, and 2004, we we quadrupled the numbers of multimillionaires in this country. And if I recall correctly, it was in 2022, the year of COVID-19, um, we um, we increased the collective net worth of the 650 billionaires in this country by $1 trillion in less than 9 months. So those disruptions, and then his other argument is if you get something like a pandemic or something that's traumatically disruptive, not expected and traumatically disrupted, what you get is a wearing away of norms and values.
And
So
that's and those norms and values are where you would be talking about mourning the loss of sort of certain worldviews or contributing to that
contributing
situation.
to it. Max Weber in 1904, in his The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, ended by basically suggesting that capitalism, devoid of its religious and moral groundings, began, became akin to the world of sports, and with a win loss kind of situation, a zero sum game, if you will. I'm not sure that was Weber's words, but that's the way I would partially interpret it. Um, the other thing he made in 1904, he was also focused on status block groups and the rise of bureaucracies, and I think bureaucracies in this country have become a form of autocracy that, in my way of thinking, the Democratic Party owns because they've defended norm, and they haven't dealt with those bureaucracies. And maybe you must be familiar with NOAA and some of its regulatory influences, and I'm familiar with the EPA and its regulatory influences. And the EPA has the right to make its own rules. It's legislatively empowered to make its own rules that have judicial credibility of law, and yet it is an institution that is totally indifferent. It was a wastewater where I'm involved. It's totally indifferent to the cost of its regulations to a community.
So yeah, that's where we sort of come to some of the cybernetic ideas that we might explore around governance and feedback and the different influences that go into decision making. And if there are indicators that are not linked into the decision making around regulation, then of course it's not going to be the variety of the regulation is not going to match the variety of the situation that it's actually trying to regulate in. So, and yes, I mean, NOAA, with our work on ocean literacy, are very familiar with the work of NOAA in terms of fisheries regulation, for example,
Mhm.
and even my own experience with relatives who are um, on the coast of on the Atlantic coast who have had experience as individual recreational fisher folk and their frustration with some of the regulations they've experienced from time to time, which they feel are not in sync with local conditions. And so making these linkages at different levels, I think, is another challenge in looking at regulation and bureaucracy. And bureaucracy can, of course, generate more bureaucracy in a way, and maybe that's also part of the challenge that you're referring to there.
It is in this respect, and let's bring in Robert Putnam and the notions of bonding and bridging social capital. The institutions of the administrative state, for the most part, I think, were put in place, and in many instances, I think their administrative functions became basically filled with patronage, political patronage, and certainly their ability to manage water in the United States. If you look at the New York Times articles in 19, and I'm sorry, I'm unstuck in time here, in 20, 23, I believe, they did articles on the plight of water in the United States, and argued that the governing systems have not done their job to preserve water. And again, this notion of bonding social capital, these institutions are empowered within a mandate, and so they focus on refining and refining and refining the mandate, and so they're internally focused. They don't pay attention to their clients like a community, and the costs and so forth. So they are what I would call bonding social capital, and not bridging social capital, which would take the community into account. And frankly, the policy literature that began to uncover that and propose alternatives came in 1996 at a thing called Watershed 96 in Baltimore. The Clinton administration largely had this done, and we haven't done anything about it since.
So that's a 30-year gap in setting something up and it not keeping pace with the realities of watershed issues. Is that what you're
That
saying, essentially?
that's precisely on target. It's pushing 35 years. If you go back to Reagan's cutting the funding for wastewater treatment back in the he killed the grants program and funded it with a state revolving fund, which has been increasingly diminished. Yeah, it goes back into the mid 80s, and without going into, so it's 40 years, and
Yeah.
without going into the details of that. I had, just to make a comment. I have a colleague that I write with at the for the Water Environment Federation, and we published an editorial on this in Water Environment Technology in 2019, and we have just written another one around One Water and the circular water economy, because without an architecture of governance to make these advances in wastewater treatment, we run the risk that we'll be trying to advance the policy level, but we won't have any way to realize it in the social system, because the governance structures haven't changed. That's supposed to be. We've been told that it may be published in the next 2 months in Water Environment Technology.
Okay, so we'll look for that because I think that in the course of these conversations, you've already mentioned a number of authors and people, and it will be good to build a list of the resources and provide links where possible. But I think this issue of um, regulation and governance across the board in so many different areas of life is partly what is causing this loss of worldviews, because there's a feeling that it used to work, sort of, and it doesn't anymore. And that's a real challenge, and it's leading to, I think, the divisive nature of discourse, if you can even call it that, or the extreme kind of conversations, or the manner of conversation, or the manner of political, um, throwing of arguments at each other, rather than deliberative discourse and a design dialogue that is constructive and aimed to mitigate the different, well, not mitigate, but to identify difference in a way that's civilized and discursive, to come to resolutions that are collectively held. And I think that's part of what's missing today in the public discourse, and a feeling of complete disconnect and helplessness, even in many respects, across the board.
So where I began was with the notion that Catherine Kubler-Ross was not only right about mourning and grief, at the personal level, that she was right, and this is probably somewhat of a bold move. I haven't traced the origins of anybody else thinking about it, but at the social and cultural level, and
Yeah.
and so the her architecture of grief um, reactions of denial, first denial, and then anger, and then bargaining, trying to negotiate your way out of it. And when that doesn't work, depression, and then in the final analysis, acceptance. And I think we're in the first four stages, which occur simultaneously and in varying degrees. And I'm not suggesting that we're all mourning the loss of a single worldview. I'm suggesting that we're mourning the loss of a variety of worldviews that really need um, uh, exploration. But assuming that the mourning is going on, the jump I made the important part about talking about this and getting as many people as we can who are interested to participate in talking about it is that it is constantly revelatory to me. I listen to the radio and I get a new idea. I listen to you, I get another idea of how this plays out. And the recent idea was on Monday. Was it Monday? No, it was Tuesday morning, and it dawned on, I was thinking about grammatica speculativa, believe it or not, which was a notion that emerged in the 12th century with people like Duns Scotus, and I don't know why I know that, but I do. And it turns out that it wasn't he that was the origin of it, but they were looking at how language influences culture. I think that's, if I understand my research in Copilot, I think that's where they were, and it dawned on me that when we are grieving and in the denial, anger, and at least depressing stages of grieving, we're inclined to operate in the declarative. And I poked at Copilot with that, and it sort of confirmed it, and so it dawned on me that what we were missing were the interrogatory and the subjunctive. We don't ask each other questions. We don't think about what might be, and so that was one artery that I was thinking about, and the other one that where I started before that was with Cartesian thought. Descartes argued to think, therefore I am. So for Descartes, to think was to be. And if we're thinking and not feeling, we're operating out of our left brain instead of our right brain, and we're obsessively so. And so we've got a culture so I started exploring the cultural roots of some of that. And I don't know if we want to get to them at this stage, but they are deep and they are compelling. And then I started looking at there's a place where William Irwin Thompson picks up on Nietzsche's Madman, where Nietzsche who finally says to his crowd, "Alas, I come too soon. The things require time. The light of the stars require time." Well, William Irwin Thompson picked up on that in a thing called The Edge of History in 1990, and and he basically said, at the edge of history isn't sufficient to take us forward, and so
Mm.
the politics of miracle must be unacceptable to our knowledge to be worthy of our being. If you can't, so if you pick up on those underlying themes, the implications of that, then we are not only at the edge of history, we're on the threshold of a new axial age, in my judgment, because geological events are now happening in contemporary historical time. So history is geohistorical, and we can change history with politics, but we can't change geohistory with politics. We can't change a glacier. We can't restore a fishery. Those are the kinds of things that we have not yet even approached. So let's just let me put a cap on this with the idea of the limits to growth. Um, the
Mm.
and climate, because the UN evidently had interviewed 75,000 people that they thought were representative of its of the people of the earth, including 10% of whom were illiterate. And its analysis was that about 80% of the people of the planet worry about climate change on a weekly or daily basis, or weather.
Right. Well, climate and weather, but certainly the impact of changing climate,
Right.
caused for whatever reasons. I think we can sit here and debate what's going on with the climate and the various factors that go in to change it, but there are obviously the personal experiences and the witnessing of melting glaciers and so on. Is there's a certain obviousness, and the rising temperatures in the ocean and the increasing acidification of the ocean are
And,
very
and
much part.
and the problem
Yeah.
is we get locked in debate because we are obsessively declarative.
Well, I think
And
this
the
issue of
debate gets
declaring.
go ahead. And so
No,
we
well, I
got
was
to get,
going to say,
go ahead.
yeah. Okay. Well, I was just going to say this, sort of coming back to your point about grieving and personal loss. It's a period of uncertainty and ambiguity that is a personal experience, and the way to deal for many in living with uncertainty is to make declarative statements and to produce fixed um, things to hang on to, when in fact the an approach might be more to understand the fluid nature of the of where life is, and to kind of go with the whole situation, which is a form of acceptance. And if you can be in a form of some acceptance, then you're going to, in a sense, relax, I should say. Well, you'll react and you'll relax. And if we are indeed on the edge of history and we're looking into a completely new um, geophysical world, but also a completely new cultural, social, economic world, then all of these knowns are now unknowns, in a sense of what the
Mhm.
future holds. And I think that's really the challenges that we're facing, and you're giving expression to with these various scholars and writers who've given pointers in different domains of their expertise and attempt to bring it all together in some holistic understanding of the condition of humankind at the moment, and what we might be able to think about in terms of encouraging more community dialogue, as you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, and how to build dialogic structures and processes that can alleviate this feeling of anger and depression and the whole loss of the anchors that have helped, well, at least Western society, at least as we know, because we are in the United States at the moment, and have a worldview or worldviews developed by our respective years on the planet in and traveling around and talking to different groups in different parts of the world, for sure. Um, anyway, that's sort of a sense of where I think we might be able to bring more thought to the role of conversation, just like this. I mean, we we've had several conversations over the years and felt that perhaps using this technology to record it as we do it live, rather than talking about planning to do it, it's just doing it. There's a certain thing that I feel about, it's just do it now. And if we can just get to some acceptance level and willingness to engage in civil discourse, we might feel better about the uncertainties that we face, in some way.
Could I put a bit of a benediction on this before we end?
Yes, of course. Yes. We
So,
got 5 minutes, I think, before
oh,
we
okay.
said we'd.
So I believe, because of my experience with the No Name Forum, that the press plays an important role in this, and the press, instead of operating solely in the declarative and reporting, to some extent the interrogatory, but basically reporting, needs to be in a position of invoking. And so it needs to find in the community people like us who are thinking and who want to explore these other dimensions. And then I think if you took that group, I've seen this happen before. That I'm not creating this from scratch. This is what happened when we created the No Name Forum. The press was instrumental in invoking it. And if you then took the forum, which was not to do anything but talk, but not to argue, you had to take your arguments to the corridor, and you had to enter as a citizen and leave your politics and profession at the door. And if you then basically structured the conversation so it was limited in the declarative, so that you got equal amounts of time for the interrogatory and the subjunctive, you might be able to create the discipline of a discussion that is more hopeful. Actually, the voluntary associations emerged out of subjunctive conversations that say, well, maybe we could pull this off. Maybe this might be. Believe me, you would be astonished, and maybe we'll get into it at some point, at what came out of people just meeting each other who hadn't met each other before and who were thinking about economic development. Then if you took that dimension of possibilities into a structured form of dialogue, you can design people can focus, even if they are disparate in their opinions, can design and come to a conclusion of what I like to call that about which they were not yet conscious when they began. And you know, and I know that process is is bridging social capital, and it builds bonds, and it creates its own incentives and community. If it's done right and richly, it can do that. Not all the time, but it does. And then the idea would be, what would be the threads that might come out of that? Well, we know voluntary associations come out of it because we experienced that in New Bedford. There used to be an idea of the learning library, so you could maybe have learning where community members are teaching other community members in an educational program, and in learning libraries that are educationally oriented. So that is the architecture that I'm thinking about. And I think if we can do it at a local level, perhaps the political parties will catch on to the fact that I'm not totally optimistic about this, but perhaps they will, particularly the Democratic Party, might pick up on the theme that just debate, declarative dialogue is not sufficient, and they might look at being more subjunctive in their possibilities of what might be, because there's lots of people out there like us who I'm sure will have ideas and contribute to something like this.
Well, absolutely. I think small groups is a good starting point, and never underestimate the power of a small group. I think it was
Margaret
Margaret
Mead,
Mead
right?
that said
Yep,
something along those lines, who was also very involved in the early days of cybernetics. And I would say that this is not just a sort of US Democratic Party, Republican Party, or it's a worldwide challenge. Just witnessing what's going on in the United Kingdom, you've got similar issues going on in many, if not most, countries in Europe, um, and other places wanting to have a voice that feel they don't have a voice. And I'm not sure that the UN is really, frankly, up to this. It seems that it has a place, but for many, it's not the place, and it's perhaps another too large organization. So I think these are the design challenges around the conversational structuring to facilitate this sort of new form of governance. And we've covered a lot of topics here today, just as a sort of way of introducing some of the things that we're thinking about and that we might explore. And we're hoping to do it over the next 5 weeks at the same time, and to take 35 to 60 minutes, depending on how everything works out, to explore this, and then invite people into the conversation as we can. So I think
absolutely.
that's the plan, right?
It is absolutely the plan.
All right. Well, wonderful. Well, I'm going to stop the live broadcast, and we can just have a little reflection ourselves.